Hello and welcome along to the latest episode of the Manchester is Red podcast from the Manchester Evening News. I'm today's host, George Smith, and I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by my colleagues Samuel Luckhurst and Tyrone Marshall this Monday lunchtime. First of all, Samuel, how are you?
Yeah, very well. Refreshed after a long journey on Saturday, but that's the last and the longest of the away days for the season now done with.
Yeah, definitely. And Ty, how are things at your end?
Yes, good, thank you. Good. Glad to be back from Bournemouth in one piece. I'm glad we made it there on time, actually, given the the journey of one of our colleagues going down to Bournemouth. We took the scenic route through the sat nav, and turned out there was a reason we were taking the scenic route.
Oh, well, at least in the end, though, you got there and did see another United victory. They won 1-0, of course, on Saturday afternoon. Casemiro's early goal, recording a second straight win, which has all but sealed a top four finish and a place back in the Champions League for next season. They need just a point from their final two games to get themselves over the line. And I think we can all agree that the job is pretty much done. It would take something quite remarkable for them to miss out from here. Liverpool, of course, dropped points on Saturday at the same time, which was a rarity. Both teams kicking off at 3:00 on a Saturday. They were held by Aston Villa to a draw. Samuel, Ty, obviously you were both there at the Vitality on Saturday afternoon. And Samuel, first of all, what did you make to the game as a whole?
Well, I suppose the two, well, United's away record this season, it was bookended by similar performances, similar results. In the start of the season, it was a 1-0 away at Southampton in that rather unpopular green kit, given that it was only the fourth time they played in it at Bournemouth at the weekend. And again, United were just seeing out a 1-0 win, grit prevailing over guile. In fairness, the first 20 odd minutes, United were very dominant, and when they got that early goal, you did wonder whether they would go in for the kill now against a team that had made I think 5 changes overall, so half the outfielders had changed, and assured of safety, United really should have been ramming home their superiority and their dominance, and they didn't. And in the end, De Gea has to make a few good saves, particularly the one from Kiefer Moore right towards the end. I think that was the 85th minute. So that was the most important of the three by far. And this is a season where we've become accustomed to watching United grind it out away from home at every ground apart from the City ground. That's the only place where they seem to have had a pretty comfortable time of it, and won with, I think, well, they won 2-0 and 3-0 in the league and the cup games. And they got the first goal in the league game before half time as well. But it seems like every other away win they've had this season, there has to have been an element of patience or hanging on at times as well. And most of those wins have come against bottom half teams. But really, since the back-to-back defeats against Brighton and West Ham, it's all been about getting points on the board, and the performance has come secondary to the results. And in the last two games, a 2-0 win, a 1-0 win, that's United fans would have taken that at this stage of the season to ensure they get Champions League football for next season. And it seems like it's inevitable now that Champions League anthem will be ringing around Old Trafford again.
Yeah, it certainly does. It would take, as I said in the intro, quite a collapse from here for it not to happen. Ty, obviously, Samuel's mentioned there that it was quite a gritty game where, one goal was enough to get the job done. I think it was the 12th time this season where United have won by a one-goal margin, either at home or away. And again, it's a pattern emerging where they are having to rely on their goalkeeper and the defenders to kind of see the job through. We know that they're not scoring bucket loads of goals in the league. And I think it was a similar case on Saturday, and Samuel's player ratings reflected that, with the attackers not really doing what's expected of them, but the defenders did.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've got to be honest, it felt like an entirely forgettable game. I think by the time we completed the drive home, we had basically forgotten about it. It's one of those when you look back in years to come and think about trips to Bournemouth, and you'll think 1-0 Casemiro. No, nothing's sticking out, because it was just a bit of a non-event of a game, really. I mean, Bournemouth were, I was going to say they were on the beach. I mean, they are on the beach, aren't they? But they, in that sunshine, having achieved their job, it was very much job done for them. They didn't put up much of a fight. They had sporadic moments where they were in the game, but beyond that, United always felt comfortable. But like you say, you also never thought that second goal was going to arrive. And the goal scoring is clearly the issue now. We were talking about it on the way home, and they need 5 goals in the last 2 games just to even match last season's total. And we know how disastrous last season was. Obviously, there's been huge improvements defensively, and they are clearly a better team than last season. But it does show that the next area of improvement for Ten Hag and this team has to be in the final third. And that's with a striker, but also with just a more cohesive attack. It didn't feel very cohesive. It didn't feel very quick on Saturday. I think there's that front three that started the game. I mean, Anthony has got better as the season has gone on. I still don't think he's excelling week in, week out, and he's still a little bit too predictable. I mean, there was a moment in the second half when Weghorst played him through on goal, and I think Samuel said to me, "Oh, he's in here," and I just said he's not scoring. And sure enough, he slowed it down. He dribbled towards the corner flag. He tried to get it on his left foot, and the chance had gone. And you do feel like with Anthony that when he's in front of goal with a chance, you don't have a lot of faith that he's going to score. Sancho's lost the zip that was in his game after he came back from his long absence. He doesn't convince at all at the moment. He doesn't sparkle that player we saw at Dortmund, the exciting winger. You just don't really see any of it at the moment. I thought Marshall was United's best attacker of the front three, and perhaps a little unfortunate to go off. But then it says everything about that attack that United were far better when Weghorst came on, and he did force the keeper into a save. He linked play a lot better, and he did make that attack look better. But that is, that's the area that needs focus on going forward. It is going forward basically that needs to be looked at, because there's not enough goals in the team. And like I say, from early in the second half onwards, you never really felt like they were going to go and score again and kill that game off.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously it was the same front three that started the win over Wolves 7 days earlier. And I kind of expected maybe Alejandro Garnacho would start after, obviously, we learnt on Friday that Marcus Rashford was likely to miss out through illness. Samuel, were you at all surprised that Erik ten Hag stuck with Jadon Sancho over Garnacho after the way the fans were calling for him, and obviously he scored against Wolves as well?
Not surprised, because Ten Hag does have some form for easing certain players back in after a lengthy absence, even with Lisandro Martinez coming back from the World Cup and going off to Argentina to celebrate Argentina's World Cup win. He didn't come back into the team immediately. There was a bit of a delay there, and he didn't even start in the Manchester derby. In fact, that was Luke Shaw and Tyrone Marshall playing on the left side of defence, and where Garnacho was out for quite a long period. My gut instinct was that Ten Hag would stick with Sancho, but obviously that wouldn't have been the popular call, given how popular Garnacho was at Old Trafford, just warming up before he came on and scored against Wolves. But the issue with Sancho is that when he does start these games and there's a competitor on the bench who, we saw it in Seville when Rashford was on the bench, and it's, he's on borrowed time, Sancho, because he doesn't seem to have the confidence or the belief that with someone who is really better equipped to be starting in that role, and he's a bit fortunate to be starting in that role, he doesn't have that belief that he's going to perform and that he's going to see out the game, that he's going to have an impact on the game. There were at least 2 occasions at Bournemouth in the first half where he was playing in front of the United supporters as well, where the United fans were actually having to urge him to be more direct, be more penetrative with the ball, and start sprinting. And that's been a bugbear with Sancho for quite some time. I don't understand why when he gets the ball, he wants to slow the pace down. There's no method to it. He didn't do that in Dortmund, I don't think, from whenever I watched him on the rare occasion there. In Dortmund, he was all about being prompt, being proactive, and having that purpose in his play. And that's just lacking at United. And so, and also he's there's competition there to try and possibly get an FA Cup final spot as well. But he doesn't have that belief. And I wrote some time ago that Ten Hag was getting impatient with him, and he was actually asked about Sancho's form on Friday, and he fudged the answer really. He said he played quite well against Wolves. I don't think Ten Hag believes that, and I don't think anybody believes Ten Hag when he says that either. And certainly ahead of the 2 games this week, I can't see Sancho starting against Chelsea. Certainly that's the time for a change, whether or not Rashford is available for that one. And by the time that Fulham game comes along, United should have the points banked to have qualified for the Champions League, and then you're looking at which players need a breather, which players need a bit more playing time ahead of the FA Cup final. And I think to start Sancho in that game might be a bit of a waste, given that they probably could do with giving Garnacho a start so that he's really fully up to speed ahead of that game against City, whether he starts it or is on the bench.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting that, because I think a lot of people will debate, obviously, will Rashford start on the left against City? Will he play through the middle with Garnacho on the left?
Yeah.
There's obviously a lot of moving parts that, can be debated nearer the time. But Ty, obviously, the other big headline from the Premier League over the weekend was, of course, City wrapping up the title, which was, to be expected after the way Arsenal had folded in the last few weeks. But obviously now United are under a little bit of pressure to try and stop this historic treble. Obviously, City have got United a week on Saturday, and then it's Inter Milan the following Saturday in the Champions League final. I suppose the big question is, can United do it? It's going to be a tall order, isn't it?
It is going to be a tall order. I mean, they have shown they can do it, I guess, by winning at Old Trafford back in January, but that did come at a point when City were probably at their lowest ebb of the season. It was a few days after they'd lost to Southampton in the Carabao Cup, and who'd have thought we might have Nathan Jones standing between City winning a quadruple come the end of this season. City are a far superior team, I think, now to the one that United beat then. But United did show they can do it. The concern would be that they look to be two teams going in opposite directions at the moment in terms of the narrative of this season. City are trending upwards. They're playing as well as they have all season. They look as settled as they have all season. They look fitter than they have all season. United look like the air is going out of their season, basically. They're maybe not stumbling over the line, but they're not playing particularly convincingly. They don't look as creative and as good as they did back in January and February. So I think that they would need to find something before the cup final to stand a chance. The possibility is that there's going to be nerves for City for sure. I think City will be more nervous than United and Inter Milan in those games because of the prize for them, and United may be able to capitalise on that. Inter Milan might be able to drag City into a war of attrition basically if they start nervously. But on recent evidence, the performances of United and City over the last month, maybe 6 weeks, you would look at it and say City are favourites for that cup final for sure. But it is a one-off game. You never know what happened. As I said last week to someone else, football is always a little bit hostage to fortune because it's a low-scoring sport. A team can win 1-0 and have one shot on goal, and the other team has 20 shots on goal. It is possible. The best team doesn't always win every game of football, so there is a possibility. But I think it's a huge leap of faith for anyone to say with any confidence at the moment that they think United will win that cup final.
Yeah, definitely. I think when you look at the fact United have only scored 3 goals in their last 4 league games compared to the way City, for instance, blew Madrid away last week by scoring 4, it's certainly going to be a tough test for Erik ten Hag. But Samuel, just lastly on this, Erik ten Hag, obviously, as Ty said there, he's already got one over on Pep Guardiola this season doing it at Old Trafford. Obviously, Wembley it's a one-off occasion. It's a very different setting. Do you think almost in some ways it could possibly considered a free hit for United, this one?
That's not a completely ridiculous outlook on it. And also, it's easy to forget that United defensively are actually pretty good. And they have been this season. The club predictably made a fuss of De Gea winning the Golden Glove. And his performance at the weekend was vital. He deserved his 8 out of 10 for the importance of the saves. He should be making all of those saves, but you've still got to make them, and you've still got to ensure that you get the 3 points. And it was a classic goalkeeping performance in that sense, in that on the 3 occasions he needed to do something, he did them faultlessly. And you've got Varane back, who has underpinned their season. It was his recall against Liverpool back in August that sparked the resurgence from United, and he does make a huge difference when he plays there. Lindelof is possibly enjoying his best spell in the United side, to the point that Ten Hag has abandoned the 2 left-footers, 2 right-footers preference of a balanced back 4 to accommodate 2 right-footers, because Lindelof absolutely deserves to start. And Luke Shaw has somewhat quietly had a really good season, playing at centre back or playing at left back. Wan-Bissaka is a nose ahead of Dalot for that right back slot at the moment. He started the last 3 games. He's still not up to it going further forward, and there still has to be a question mark over his long-term future at United. But defensively, he's a lot better this season than last season. Casemiro was quality at the weekend, and he's an old warhorse who has come up against Pep Guardiola teams. He was very good in the Derby win in January as well. So those players are going to be absolutely vital in that cup final. And as rampant as City have been, United are one of the few teams this season that kept Haaland quiet. And it seems like it's been more regular than it has for a striker who's scored 50-odd goals this season. He's spectacular. He looks like he was built in a lab. There are times when he is unplayable. And United have experienced both versions of Haaland. They were powerless against him when he plundered a hat-trick in October, but they shackled him really impressively at Old Trafford. And they've got the players to do it, even without Lisandro Martinez. As I said earlier, Martinez didn't start Old Trafford in January, and in a one-off game, sometimes you see it in tournaments. Players rise to a level they are never going to rise to again in their career, because it's the occasion of it. It's the significance of it. They have that. There's someone at United who refers to a laser focus, and it is kind of that, approaching it. And it does help that United will not have the Europa League final to interrupt the week leading up to that cup final. I think if they did, then you'd probably get more United fans selling their tickets ahead of the FA Cup final, just resigned to them not laying a glove on City. But they have got the quality to harm City. They have got the quality to do it. And from United fans' perspective, they are probably just hoping that this run of rather underwhelming form, where the performances aren't particularly good, the results have picked up in the last couple of weeks, that when it comes to cup final day, there is that underdog spirit that sees United over the line. We've seen it before in the FA Cup final, not particularly often in the last 20 years or so. I mean, the only exception would probably be when Wigan beat City 10 years ago. It's difficult to recall any other underdogs doing it on cup final day. So it will be a mammoth test of this United team's mettle, but what a way it would be to cap the season.
Certainly would, and we'll, of course, talk about that more next week as we build up to the FA Cup final at Wembley. But do rejoin us in part 2 of this podcast, when we will have a look at the latest on the transfer front and off-field issues. Welcome back to part 2 of the Manchester is Red podcast for the Manchester Evening News. On the transfer front, of course, everybody's aware of what United need to do this summer. We all know that a striker is going to be the main priority for Erik ten Hag. We know that. In terms of getting players out the door this summer, that's going to be a big task for what the club's got to do. Samuel, you wrote quite a few times recently that Erik ten Hag plans to be ruthless in his decision-making. And you've done a line this morning about Nottingham Forest being keen on signing Dean Henderson on a permanent basis. Obviously, he spent the season on loan at the City Ground, but has been sidelined since January with injury. I think me and you have said on recent episodes of this podcast that he's one of the few sellable assets that United will have despite that injury. But are you surprised that Forest are going to go in for a permanent move, considering they've only really seen him for half a season?
No, I think he's impressed enough there and endeared himself enough for that to be the type of signing that the whole club could get behind. They need some continuity there next season after 2 transfer windows where 29 players I think have joined Forest on loan and permanently, and really one of those standout signings was Keylor Navas. The situation they were in, they did very, very well to move for a goalkeeper that wily, but also still that agile that he can save them points, and he has done that in a number of games for Forest, and that's been vital, especially with their home form, which is that's kept them in the Premier League. They've had some very impressive home results this season, and Henderson contributed to that with the Liverpool win back in October. And where Navas is 36 and a loanee, and the alternative is Wayne Hennessy, who frankly is just not a very good goalkeeper. Is probably not even good enough to be a number 2 at a Premier League club, I would argue. Then it makes infinite sense to go for a goalkeeper who's 26, who's Premier League proven, who's attainable, and is already familiar with the settings, is already familiar with the manager, is familiar with the squad. There's continuity there. He's a long-term option, and really, with the price I was told that with Forest looking at a £30 million deal, it's in the interests of all parties to get that deal done. I don't think Dean Henderson would turn his nose up at going to Nottingham Forest. It means that he's playing in the Premier League. He's absolutely, his place is secure going into the season, even though he's recovering from surgery on a thigh strain that is going to keep him out for quite a while in the upcoming months. But he's staying at a club where he is valued, and he knows he's going to be starting for them when he recovers, which was what he thought was the situation he was in at United, only he underestimated Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's decision-making or lack of decision-making. And where it's the European Championship next year, he's playing at the level he needs and wants to be playing at to give him a decent shot of getting back into the England squad. Because I think it's still arguable that on his day, he's the best of those 4 English goalkeepers. I think he's possibly got the most complete skill set, but he's had, unfortunately for him, a few really bad setbacks in recent years. Even at the Euros a couple of years ago, he had to withdraw from the squad because of I think it was a groin injury. Then he got COVID, and that meant he missed all of pre-season for United, and also killed his chance, it seems, of becoming the club's number 1. And then he's had this thigh strain that has ruled him out since, I think the last time he played was January the 14th. So he'll have been out for the best part of probably 7 or 8 months by the time he's available to play a competitive game again. So really, this is a chance for stability in his career. That I think he's also such a strong personality that he is prepared to take the plunge to say, yeah, I'll leave United. He doesn't want to stay in his comfort zone. He's even said that before. So you have to commend him for being that bullish to just put United in the past. It's not like I think what possibly helps him is that although he's a United Academy graduate, he's not from Greater Manchester. He's from Whitehaven. He's from Cumbria way. So that emotional attachment is possibly not. It possibly doesn't pull on the heartstrings as much as it would do for an academy graduate who's from Salford or Wythenshawe, I suppose. And as you said, United, they very, very rarely get good fees for players, and Dean Henderson is a player that they should be getting a really good fee for. And £30 million for a 26-year-old backup goalkeeper who has not got many England caps and has been injured since January. If you can't muck around with that, you've just got to ensure that you get the fee for it and you bank it and then you reinvest it in the squad. Because as we've said before, United are of the opinion that De Gea's getting a new contract, so just going off that alone, you have to sell Henderson. I don't entirely agree with that approach. I think it would have been a worthy approach to tell De Gea that thank you for your service, you've been a great player for the club, but we're not giving you a new contract, and then just kind of go with Dean Henderson to see if he can cut it over a season, and if he can, great, you're saving money. If he can't, then you sign a new goalkeeper next year. But I think it's pretty clear that is not going to happen.
Yeah, it certainly seems the case. And Samuel, you've mentioned there about Dean Henderson's bullish character and, being very determined. And I actually remember in pre-season when he completed that move to Forest last summer, he actually said if he could play in any fixture, it would be the 2 against United this season, which obviously part of his loan agreement meant that wasn't possible, but that was what he wanted to do. And Ty, I think, Samuel summed it up nicely there about Dean Henderson's future and, the knock-on effect it's likely to have for David De Gea keeping his spot. But I think with obviously what's gone off with Dean Henderson in the last couple of years, with obviously Solskjaer making a false promise to him, I think it just makes sense for United and Henderson to go their separate ways, doesn't it, this summer?
Yeah, it does. He said some pretty bolshy things when he moved to Forest last year at the media day there. I think he's right to feel aggrieved about the way things panned out at United. I think there's as much of it where it's his misfortune as being, as feeling mistreated and lied to. De Gea did start that season really well. The reality is De Gea wouldn't have been in goal had Henderson not got COVID. But when he did end up in goal, he did play really well, and Solskjaer probably felt he was kind of stuck with what decision to make, really, because he'd made the promise to Henderson, yet De Gea didn't deserve to be dropped. So I think there's huge amount of misfortune here for Henderson, the way things have panned out for him at United. It would still be nice to see him get one more chance, but I think that's clearly gone. If they do sell him, then they need another keeper, you would think. It's a case, I guess, of whether they look to sign someone young and maybe phase De Gea out, or whether they sign someone who really can challenge for him. But it does make infinite sense. And you mentioned there, he's one of the few sellable assets. We know United need to sell to raise funds this year. Whoever they sign as a striker is going to eat into the vast majority of their transfer budget. So to raise 30 million by selling Henderson, they could potentially sell McTominay and Maguire, say, and get close to raising 100 million, which they can reinvest, and that might buy you a right back and another goalkeeper. So they need to be sort of open to all possibilities. I know, like we say, Henderson, if he's going to be number 2 again, you may as well sell him because he won't take that. Maguire, I think it's clear for all to see now that it's in the interest of both parties to go. McTominay might be someone that Ten Hag doesn't want to sell, but he is a sellable asset. You're not going to bring much money in for Eric Bailly or Alex Telles, so you've got to be open to the possibility of selling players you don't really want to raise a bit of money. And I think if you get 30 million for Henderson, I think it's a deal that makes sense for all parties.
Yeah, certainly, one of the most sellable assets, as we've said there. And obviously, Champions League football does look assured for next season now, which means obviously United are going to be able to attract a better standard of player. And Ty, you did the story last night with some quotes from Casemiro talking about Erik Ten Hag's hunger for winning and how it surprised a lot of the players in the squad. That surely is only going to attract players to United, this coming summer. And Erik Ten Hag, I think he said 2 or 3 weeks ago that a lot of targets are already keen to come to United. At that point, it maybe felt like he jumped the gun a little bit too early when they lost at Brighton and then at West Ham. But now, obviously, they do look, assured of that top 4 spot. I think Casemiro's ambition ultimately is going to sell a lot to these players that United are a club now moving in the right direction again.
Yeah, a lot of the players have spoken positively about Ten Hag this season. Privately, you hear the same sort of thing. There's players, I know for a fact there's players in that squad who aren't getting a game who rate him very highly and say he does tell you why you're not playing, and you can see from what he's doing on the training ground that he is a very good coach. He is clearly the manager of that squad. He is clearly, it's probably not been the case at United for a long time, but he's clearly the most important person, certainly on the footballing side of that business, maybe the most important person at the club, and that's what you would expect from a manager. There's always an attraction to play for United. You only have to look at Casemiro last summer, who was happy to swap the Champions League for the Europa League for a season for that new challenge. But he was very interesting on Ten Hag, and it was interesting what he had to say. He conducted the interview in Spanish actually, so I only really saw what he said when it was translated and written down for us. But maybe doing it in his mother tongue as well brought out a bit more honesty, because the stuff about the squad talking amongst themselves about how heavy was the word I think he used Ten Hag is with his demands kind of tallies with what you hear privately as well from what he's like. And quite a few players have mentioned this ambitious streak of his and this desperation to win that Ten Hag is and that Ten Hag has. And Casemiro, I think in the space of maybe 2 paragraphs in the answer about Ten Hag, I think he called him ambitious 3 times, maybe 4 times. So it does show that he's clearly a manager who's got the respect of the entire dressing room, even the players who aren't playing, and that definitely helps. And there is a sense now. It took a bit of a leap of faith for someone like Casemiro to come last year. Now you'd think players would look at it and think, right, that's a club on the right track. They've got a settled manager who isn't going anywhere, who we know has been successful in his first season. So they definitely, they do look a more sellable asset to players if anyone had any doubts. They do look like a club going in the right direction with a good manager in charge.
Yeah, definitely, and it's no doubt going to mean that Frenkie de Jong's name's going to crop up again very soon on a regular basis. So we're all going to be ready for that. And Samuel, last week you did a story on Erik ten Hag obviously being keen on another midfielder as well as a striker as a priority in the summer. Frenkie de Jong came out over the weekend and said that he was happy to stay at Barcelona potentially for the rest of his career. How likely is it, do you think, that United will renew that interest and have a real second attempt at getting Frenkie de Jong to Old Trafford this summer?
What I would say is I think it's unlikely that they will sign Frenkie de Jong, because although he said this last year, and that was my gut. Well, when I was first told that the interest from United was concrete, I did think, why are they going for a player who's just completely unattainable? Who, when he joined Barcelona, you could see him essentially seeing out his career at the club, and that remains the case. That's not a surprise. His preference would always be to stay at Barcelona rather than go to Manchester United. Privately, he was prepared to do that last year because I don't think he appreciated the way he's being treated by Barcelona, or the fact that they were open to selling him, that they did accept a fee from United, which normally if you accept a fee from a club for a player, the player is packing his bags and he's on his way. But where Barcelona's finances are just, I mean, you could write a book on how confusing they are, how uncertain they are, and the mess that is still yet to be cleaned up there regarding the finances. And that's always a red flag when approaching Barcelona to sign such a good player like De Jong. So I think in Ten Hag's mind, De Jong is like the best in class as a midfielder of the type that he wants at United. But I just don't think he's going to be attainable again this summer. I'd be, from having watched him particularly in the Old Trafford game, where I thought he was in the first half, I thought he was excellent, and he was probably Barcelona's best player on the night. It'd be great to see him in the Premier League. You want to see the best players in the world in front of you on a weekly basis. That's one of the treats of watching such a big club who attract big names, who attract such quality footballers. You want to watch good football, and you want to watch some of the best, and that's been the case watching Casemiro this season, and also Christian Eriksen, names that we'd heard of, and then someone like Lisandro Martinez, who not many of us I think would have been aware of before the Ten Hag interest came in. He's been terrific to watch as well this season. But with De Jong, there are so many obstacles to doing a potential deal there, and also Barcelona have just let Sergio Busquets go. De Jong has started the majority of La Liga matches he's been available for under Xavi this season. You look at Xavi as a coach and Frenkie de Jong, and the way Xavi played, the way Frenkie de Jong played, they are kindred spirits. It would be remiss of Barcelona to just write off De Jong, but they were receptive to selling him last year. They are going to have to sell some players this year, and in some ways De Jong is probably the most sellable asset, in that if they really do need the money, there is a club that would pay top dollar to sign him, and they were in very long discussions last year about it. So I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility, but I just think there are so many hurdles there still that it still seems quite fanciful. And De Jong is never, ever going to publicly say, I want to sign for Man United. He would only say that if he was at Carrington in the press room signing his papers and wearing a Man United shirt, how delighted he was to be at the club. He is going to, because with the wage deferral, you would imagine that's an issue. If he starts saying he wants to play for Man United, there's probably something in the small print that suggests that he's not entitled to those wages if he's flirting with another club. So we could all do without another summer of Frenkie de Jong. I think it's safe to say.
Yeah, another 100-day plus saga. Hopefully not on its way, but we'll see. But that's all for part 2 of this Manchester City's Red podcast. Do rejoin us in a moment for part 3, and I'll preview ahead of Thursday night's clash with Chelsea. Welcome back to part 3 of this Manchester is Red podcast. As I said a few moments ago, Chelsea up next for Manchester United at Old Trafford on Thursday night, which is, of course, a game in hand that's taken a while to come around. Ty, obviously, we've spoken about what United need. They need one more point from those 2 remaining games to get the job done. Chelsea, of course, have been a mess this season. I think that's the only word that we can use to describe them. You can never say never in football, but surely Thursday night is the night United officially get that job done and their Champions League place rubber stamped.
Yeah, you would certainly think so. It's hard to see Chelsea picking up a result. I mean, United, even at times where they've gone through troughs and rough patches this year, United have always been pretty reliable at Old Trafford. One defeat in the league on the first day of the season, that loss to Real Sociedad. Beyond that, they've been pretty faultless in league and cup really at Old Trafford. So their home form has been excellent. It is hard to see that Chelsea team have got nothing left to play for really, and they don't strike you as the kind of characters who, with nothing left to play for, are going to give their all at the moment. Like we say, the squad's a total mess. Lampard can't decide what team to pick from one week to the next. It's constant chopping and changing. Watched most of the game at the Etihad yesterday, and although they only lost 1-0, there was times where they just drifted through it. I mean, for a lot of the first half, it felt like a testimonial almost. They didn't lay a glove on City. They didn't even try to lay a glove on City. There was no intent to press. It was all just a bit half-hearted. It was like they eventually realised that this was City who themselves were cruising through the game, and they had a bit of a go and arguably unlucky not to score in the end. But against the motivated United team who are going to be trying to get the win and seal the deal when it comes to Europe, it's hard to see how they don't get that result. I mean, you look back to the trip United had to Stamford Bridge in October, and that was a fairly even game at the time. United started really well, and Potter made a change, and it balanced itself out. And in the end, you felt a draw was probably about right. Casemiro got that late equaliser, but since then the teams have just gone in different directions really. And like we say, Chelsea do look a mess. I think the only thing that might change their approach this week is if confirmation came that Pochettino had got the job. Obviously not going to take charge of the game, but it might be a bit of a reminder to some of those players that there is a new manager coming in. They need to impress, but it's an open secret at the moment, and they still don't look particularly bothered by the prospect. So yeah, it's hard to see with the way United have been playing at home how they don't at least get a point to make sure of top 4.
Yeah, definitely. And United, obviously, both of their last 2 games are at home. Fulham to come on Sunday on the final day of the season. If United were to win these last 2 games, they'd end the season with 48 points won at home, which would actually be the highest points tally since their final season under Sir Alex Ferguson. So there is something, a little bit of a statistical opportunity for Eric Ten Hag to achieve something here. Samuel, we've mentioned about the goal scoring issues. United have been, defensively perfect at Old Trafford this season. Only conceded 8 times. The biggest home win in the league, though, is only 3-0. Do you think there's maybe if they get the job done relatively early on in this game on Thursday night, that they might finally loosen the shackles a bit and maybe give the fans something to shout about?
I think they'll give them something to shout about, and that they should ensure that it's a successful season. And it's although there's another home game on the Sunday, it should be a pretty good send off ahead of going to Wembley, because they are going to want to sustain that momentum. But as you said, they don't win. They don't get heavy wins. They've only scored 4 goals in 2 games this season, and those 2 were in the League Cup against Villa and the Europa League against Real Betis. This is not the season for vintage United. I think in their however many 5-point plan, however many point plan it is to become a genuine force again. This is a season about getting results, getting back up the ladder, getting a new year chiselled onto the honours board to end the trophy drought, which they have done, and they are almost certainly going to be finishing in the top 4. So in that sense, it is job done. And if they win the FA Cup, then I think a very good season becomes probably a great season because of what is riding on that game at Wembley. I don't really see any of these games this week as United cutting loose. Sometimes on the final day you see some mad score lines. I go back to, was it Middlesbrough thumping Manchester City 8-0 or 8-1 back in Sven-Göran Eriksson's last game. I think Stoke beat thrashed Liverpool 6-1 in Steven Gerrard's final game. Tottenham the following year it relegated Newcastle, having just gone close to winning the league. They got thrashed 5-1 or 5-0 there, I think. So there's always, it seems like every season there is this mad final day score because there's players play with abandon and there's nothing really riding on certain matches. But the last 5 games between Chelsea and United, I think the score sequence is 1-1, 1-1, 1-1, 0-0. That's flipping it. And the last Chelsea manager to actually beat United was Frank Lampard when he was their permanent manager in the FA Cup semi-final. Yet even that season, I think up until that game, Lampard was seen as Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's patsy. United had beaten Chelsea 3 times, twice in the league, once in the League Cup, and 2 of those wins were achieved with the same tactic. It was not exactly a matchup of tactical managerial masterminds, Solskjaer and Lampard, and it's not a surprise that both clubs have moved on well and truly from those 2 tenures. But Chelsea are in. I mean, this is bound. I think this is due to be surely their worst season since, is it 95-96? I think they finished in the bottom half of the table, and that was the summer where they started to become more of an exotic club again, in that they signed Di Matteo, Zola. I think Gianluca Vialli also signed that summer. So that's when this rebranding of Chelsea changed, and they actually started to become one of the eminent teams in England. So it's pretty extraordinary what's happened at Chelsea, and I think that the prospect of a defeat, United losing that game in midweek, it's not something that anyone can foresee happening whatsoever.
No, certainly not. And Ty, I suppose these 2 home games that United have got, obviously getting the Champions League assured is the main objective. But I suppose beyond that, it's 2 games for everybody to audition for a starting berth at the cup final, isn't it?
It is, yeah. You would think there's probably not many places up for grabs, maybe right back, but I think it'd probably be a surprise if he doesn't go with Wan-Bissaka in the cup final. The midfield will probably pick itself. The interesting area for the cup final is what he does with the attack, and I know we've talked about Garnacho and having an audition, and it wouldn't be a surprise if he started against Fulham on the last weekend of the season, but I'd be very surprised if Garnacho was starting the cup final. And I thought Ten Hag's answer about him last week after his goal against Wolves was really insightful, actually. There's a lot of detail in the answer, and he did touch on kind of the areas he needs to improve about the defensive side of his game, really, and knowing when to press and stuff. And I just can't see him playing someone like a player who Ten Hag thinks has to improve in that area. I can't see him playing him against Man City. And I think the most likely change I think we'll see against City is Fernandes playing out wide. Maybe Fernandes on the left and Anthony on the right and Rashford through the middle. Or even Rashford on the left, Fernandes on the right, and Martial or Weghorst up front. But I think the most likely route to the most likely player to come into the cup final team, basically, I think, is Fred, who's not starting at the moment. That's how I'd see it. So maybe Fred will get a start against Fulham if it's job done. I can't see Ten Hag making many changes for the Chelsea game, but if they get the result they need, I think the Fulham game he will. And I think the one player who's probably got a claim to press for a cup final place this week will be Fred.
Do you think there's a danger that he's... Sorry, do you think there's a danger that he's already shown his hand a little bit there with the game in January, that if he was to revert to it, City are kind of like, they know what's coming?
Yeah, possibly. I thought it was interesting when he spoke about Fernandes after the Villa game when he played on the right, because he played on the right both home games against Villa as well, and he'd said beforehand how Emery surprised him in Emery's first game in charge when they won 3-1. Then played Fernandes on the right twice.
And Fernandes was suspended, wasn't he?
He was suspended for that game, yeah. And whatever it was that Villa did that surprised Ten Hag, his approach since is to play Fernandes on the right. And he spoke about it. I asked him in that press conference after the Villa game why he played on the right, and he did. He said it's a tactical plan against specific opponents. Basically, that there's certain things he does on the right. I think from a defensive point of view, seemingly like the intelligence of knowing when to press and when to track certain players, that makes him appealing on the right. And I guess with Villa, they don't use a lot of width, that team. I don't think they play quite narrow.
No, they do.
So I think having Fernandes inside is probably beneficial. And City are the same. City don't play with a lot of width, really. They'll obviously have John Stones, you'd imagine, coming inside to play in centre mid. So I guess he'd want Fernandes in the front three, maybe for the intelligence of adding the extra player in midfield. But yeah, like you say, it does. If we're working that out, then I think it's fair to say that City would probably probably have worked it out as well, and be coming up with plans to stop it.
Yeah, I think Pep Guardiola's more qualified than we are on those judgment calls.
Yeah, marginally. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Just
a little bit. Well, I think that's the perfect place to wrap up this episode of the Manchester City is Red podcast. A big thank you as ever to both Samuel and Tyrone for joining me on this Monday lunchtime. Of course, it goes without saying that if you enjoyed this podcast and you would prefer to watch it as well as listen to us, we are now on YouTube as well. Just search Manchester is Red and you can subscribe to the channel as well. We'll be back later in the week, most probably on Friday, to reflect on the game with Chelsea and look ahead to the final day clash with Fulham. So make sure you join us then. And in the meantime, do take care.